Hey everyone, it's Amanda Radke back for a new season of the Heart of Rural America podcast. After a hiatus, we have fresh content, a fresh look, and exciting guests with top of the news issues that you want to hear about as it relates to the future of agriculture, your property rights, and really what we all care about, the heart of rural America and creating a place where our kids and grandkids can grow and dream and build businesses and not have to worry about intrusion or overreach or trampling of their constitutional rights. To kick off this fresh new season of the Heart of Rural America, I couldn't think of anyone better than my friend Heather Maude. Her family, her and her husband Charles, made national news over a fence line dispute over all things, but that's simplifying the story. And so we're going to bring Heather on to the show today to talk about where her family's case is, where things stand today, and what she's working on now. So, Heather, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's exciting to be your first one back from your hiatus, and we appreciate all that you've been working on at the state and federal level also. We've overlapped with some of this in the last couple of years. That is good as well. As for where we are, a brief recap. We were indicted with separate criminal felonies over a fence line in 2024 by the U.S. Forest Service, actually the USDA. And we got the criminal charges dropped thanks to the work of a lot of people, but Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins is who made the determination to drop those charges. Then we stopped a potential civil case that was to follow, and then worked directly with the USDA and the U.S. Forest Service to determine a course of resolution. We have since concluded that we utilized the Small Tracts Act, which our situation fit perfectly within the parameters of that, in that it was small, it was isolated, it did not meet the merits to become national grassland before the national grassland came into existence, as my husband's family has farmed it since. I have pictures of them taking alfalfa off in 1912, and that's a cultivated crop.
Wow.
Yeah, so we wrapped that up late 2025. And Charles was able to plant winter wheat on it. And that was one of the biggest motivators in all of this, is you walk across the heart and soul of your husband's family heritage. This occurred on the piece of property they first purchased in the area, and they staked out across it into a planted crop when they did the initial quote unquote survey. That, in combination with the casual approach to removing me from my children and putting me in prison for 10 years simply for being Charles' wife, was very motivating to me. So seeing him plant that this last fall was quite monumental for our family, I would say. He still has a lot of frustrations. Without active management, Western South Dakota farmland deteriorates rapidly. So he has quite a job before him to get this back up to his standards, but we're very, very blessed to be here, being able to operate this. It's our only irrigated ground. We're going into a third very dry year where we live. And now we are in the process of being involved in a lot of these conversations on Lawfare. And then also a big focus for us is, how do we prevent our family from facing future persecution from a future administration? Statistics show that once you're on an agency's bullseye target list, you typically do not see yourself removed from it. So we're very hopeful, not only for our family, but for everyone, that we can change that course for private property owners and Americans in general over the remainder of Secretary Rollins' term and hopefully beyond.
You know, I find it ironic, after everything you guys have been through, not just you and Charles, but your beautiful children, Lyle and Kennedy, and as a family, you know, you and your husband facing jail time, being separated from your kids, losing your ability to own and manage your ranch as you see fit, and you're having the federal government target you to the point that it is national news, and your face is across the papers, whether you wanted it to be or not. And in all of that, you say that you're blessed. And I think that's a testament to the Holy Spirit that's in you, your faith, your steadfastness, and your commitment to your family and agriculture and all those things. But at the end of the day, there's another thing that sticks out to me is you're a mom, and they messed with your family. And not only are you fighting, and I've seen it, I've been blessed personally to be able to work with you and Charles now this year on legislation out in Pierre, and then getting to be with you guys out in DC. But it's like, you don't want this to ever happen to anybody else ever again. And so, can you speak a little bit to the Lawfare, what this administration is doing to address some of this bureaucratic abuse in the system that's existed for years on years without check?
Yes, I can. I think the most notable thing that this administration has done that I don't recall seeing in my lifetime is they have admitted there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
They have said, oh, yeah, lawfare occurs. Unfortunately, it occurs here with our people, and we became the poster child of that in many ways, along with a handful of others. And so I think that very critical first step was admitting this is true and it does happen here, and here are examples. And then the next part is they have said we must fix it. And yesterday was a lawfare roundtable in
Mm-hmm.
Washington, D.C. And another critical part of this is they are bringing in actual producers to explain what lawfare looks like and what it actually means, because we all know that Washington, D.C. is far removed from the majority of the public lands where we see a lot of these lawfare acts occurring. So a huge thing, I thought a huge part of this occurred yesterday when we saw Mr. Shad Sullivan and Ms. Margaret Byfield testify and share their personal family experiences. And I have not watched all of it, but my mom said one of the more heart-wrenching components was they asked about the long-term effects. And both Shad and Margaret pointed out that they believe a death of a parent occurred from the stress of the lawfare. So those people that want to help us but are not actively living and working in the West, hearing those things is critical. The next step must be action. I'm so grateful for, how much of the track we have made it around thus far, and these educational, conversational, declarative components. But now we need action on how we stop not only existing lawfare, but we need protections in place for future potential acts of lawfare.
And so you mentioned, and I just want to tell folks, and I'll include this in the show notes, but for folks that want to watch what Heather was referring to, it was the GOP Oversight Committee titled Farming on Trial, a roundtable on the growing use of lawfare against American agriculture. And like she said, our friend Shad Sullivan spoke. He spoke about some of these eminent domain abuses and the things that producers across the country have had to experience at the hands of overreach and regulation. We also saw South Dakota Attorney General Marty Jackley running for Congress, of course. Heather, I wanted to ask you about this because Attorney General Jackley did mention your case. And one thing that kind of stuck out to me is he mentioned who had helped you in this arena. And I know for a long time there was a lot of frustration that the federal delegation really wasn't doing much. So could you just clear the record on, who actually showed up to help you guys? And I think we probably did see a lot of grandstanding and a lot of political jockeying for people wanting to take credit for things they never did.
We certainly did. Yes, we saw the vast majority of our South Dakota elected officials casually sit by and wait to see if I was tossed in prison for 10 years or not. And then once myself, the federal administration, and frankly, elected officials from other states stopped it, they've all, as you pointed out so well, have been jockeying for an opportunity to be before the camera. Yeah, I had several people send me components of Marty's testimony, and I really appreciated him taking the time to include us right in his opening statements. The one part that I would like to clarify is in one of the question answers, he said that Senator Rounds and Representative Johnson both helped us, and that came across as they helped us in an equal manner, and that's not accurate. Senator Round's staff reached out to me directly. They wrote a very comprehensive and well done letter on our behalf right before we were indicted that became a critical component of our case. Representative Johnson did not. To my knowledge, Representative Hageman of Wyoming wrote the two letters that he signed off on, and what I was told is they hope to get him to sign it. He did not ever reach out to us directly. We had to initiate all communication. That was very challenging with his staff. We attempted to visit with him. Charles did at Dakota Fest in 2025. That did not go well. Meanwhile, he did have videos out championing his efforts on our behalf, but he was unwilling to sit down and have a conversation with Charles. He did actually run into a friend of ours at Walmart while he was in town for that late one night. And this is pretty telling. Our friend runs into him and, hello, Mr. Johnson, Representative Johnson, thank you for all you're doing for the mods. I mean, are you aware of where they're at now or something to that effect? And Dusty's response was, if they hadn't done something wrong, they wouldn't be in this position. And then he walked away, and they happened to catch each other a few aisles over. And I guess he must have had a moment to think, but he said, but we will help them, sir. And one thing about this that I believe our elected officials sometimes forget, and I believe Dusty has forgotten, which makes me very concerned for him as our governor, is in an instant like that, where you have the federal government attacking a citizen that is one of your constituents, my guilt or innocence becomes irrelevant. As my elected official, you work on my behalf. I have since proven my innocence, but in that moment, his job and his loyalty was very clearly to be towards the system, not towards me. That's an error in comprehending the job that he was filling the role of at that time. And one of my biggest concerns is that we will see that similar miscalculated mindset applied should he be elected governor.
Well, and of course, you are assumed innocent till proven guilty. And so, absolutely, as a citizen who's experiencing challenges, you're right. He answers to the taxpayers of South Dakota who elected him to serve. And it's ironic you said Charles had a bad experience at Dakota Fest, because I too, this last year, had a bad experience with Dusty. I mean, it's very known fact that he would not talk to landowners in our carbon pipeline fight for the last 4 years. And he released this bill, HR 4135, that would fast track things like data centers and CO2 pipelines right after we had just passed HB 1052. And, we made so many cries and pleas to him. Please, can we just understand what this bill is? We were denied meetings. He got very angry and hostile at Dakota Fest. And I think it's just a testament to how he looks at, I don't know, everyday citizens like you and I, who are literally just trying to be left alone, mind our own business, and raise our families and do good and build our own piece of the American dream. And it's almost like that gets in the way of his agendas. Like you said, protecting the system, which he's been a part of his whole adult career. It's frustrating. And so, on that note, you have come out in an endorsement for this governor's race. I mean, we've had 2 debates happen. There's a third one happening here soon where you can really compare and contrast the 4 candidates. You came out with an endorsement of one of those candidates. Would you like to speak on that?
Sure. Yep, I absolutely would. This is the first time that we have ever endorsed a candidate for anything. So we're kind of in a whole new realm, but we have come out in very strong support of John Hanson, and then he has named Carla Lims as his lieutenant governor. And we have actually had experiences with Governor Roden in this as well, or a lack thereof is how I should explain that. I don't have an opinion on Toby. He did not come out with us in any way, but after my experiences with John, we're very actively supporting him. And here is why. We'll start with Governor Roden. Governor Roden was made aware of our situation throughout it unfolding by our friends and neighbors, and never once reached out. He was invited to the property and never came. He lives about 70 miles north of us. The week before that original May 1st, 2025 press conference on the USDA steps with Secretary Rollins, he called a neighbor and asked, so is it true that Charles and Heather didn't build the fence? And that had been very clearly lined out in Senator Round's letter prior to us even being indicted, along with a lot of other points along the way. And our neighbor said, sir, I think you and I could go down and look at this. You're a rancher. It is very obvious this is not a new fence.
Right.
He would not come, but he called and asked very basic questions. And then that was very, very challenging to stand on stage with people who, once again, it's a business. It's your family legacy, my husband's family legacy. And then it's my family itself that was being destroyed. And to have them willing to stand there and not even look into it and then say, we were working on it quietly. So quietly, he didn't know the basics of the case and would not come and view it. But was wanting to stand up the first time there was an opportunity to proactively juice it politically. And that really soured me on Governor Roden, just the way in which he chose to present himself throughout that. By contrast, John Hanson and Carla Lims reached out to me in April of 2025. And I know you were involved in this as well, but a large group of our state officials, elected officials, appointed officials, they came out on Good Friday of 2025. Charles and I were not allowed to attend per our criminal defense attorneys. We could not speak to each other. We could not speak about the case. So consequently, we could not be in an area where anybody could construe that we were doing that. So God bless our parents and our neighbors who showed up and toured the location and explained the situation. And from that point on, John has made himself available to us. He is the only one of our governor candidates and our members of Congress whose cell phone I have. He
Mhm.
is the only one who has called me. I still have not had a direct phone call from any of our legislative body, but John has both of our cell phones. He called and checked up on us. He had no problem being concerned about being drug into a lawsuit of his own should he actively and publicly stand up and say, this is wrong and I will fight for the citizen. So when I look at all of those actions played out and who is willing to directly interact with us when it doesn't look rosy and try to get to the appropriate outcome versus who showed up after the fact and just wanted to be in the spotlight, that is why we have chosen to endorse John and Carla's, because they were there when it wasn't rosy. They didn't have to make an excuse of saying their help to us was very quiet and private. No, they were very public, outspoken in their support. They continue to call us. I met with John and other officials on, something somewhat related to our situation that we've learned in the last year yesterday in Pierre. And he set that meeting up for us. So that when you look at the leadership and when you look at South Dakota and when you look at all of these things we are facing, I think each citizen, I don't want to tell you how to vote, but I get asked all the time. That's why we chose to endorse John. But I think you need to think about the leadership style you want to enable your family to live the life you want in this state.
Mhm.
And I've had quite an experience with all of them. As I said, except for Toby, I don't have an opinion on him, but I have had such a good experience with John. And I think there's also some issues when something as large as ours occurs and you ignore it. That kind of makes me concerned about how well the western part of the state would be represented should he be elected. So that is the style of leadership I believe in and I want. I want to think that our governor, should someone face something horrific like this, that he would be willing to stand up to the federal government, that he would be willing to reach out to the constituent. And John Hansen's the only one who did that for us. And we are quite an example for the state to look at as we go into this election.
Well, that's been my experience with him too. I mean, when this carbon pipeline came and condemned 160 landowners, and John had nothing to gain really early on.
Right.
No other legislators would care, really. Carla was an impacted landowner, so she knew. She called John and said, hey, there's a landowner meeting up in Leola, South Dakota, which who's heard of that place? And he didn't hesitate. He said, let's go. Then he actually, before it was even like a popular thing to speak on, he debated one of these pipeline companies' navigator. And I mean, resoundingly won that debate. 2 weeks later, they packed up their bags and left the state of South Dakota. And, I've just seen it over and over again with John on HB 1052, on the RO21 fight to overturn that bad legislation, even to this year where you and I were part of an effort to eliminate eminent domain for private gain once and for all. And when we had some of these like liberal environmental extremist groups really start attacking the legislation, I know at one point I was really struggling and said, John, I mean, this was in a back room. It was myself and Carla and John and Mark Lopke and Spencer Gosh. And I said, guys, what do we do now? And John was resolute. He said, win, lose, or draw, I'm proud of this policy. We go down swinging. And that's the kind of like principled, steadfast leadership of like, there is a backbone there. He's going to stand up for what is right, no matter the cost. I'm just so grateful for his wife, Sheila, and the 6 kids for being willing to share John with all of us, but they are truly the grassroots candidate in the race. So it's going to come to the people of South Dakota deciding, where do you want to invest in? Where do you want the future of South Dakota to go? And I guess for me personally, I see what Dusty's doing with his $7-8 million in his war chest, all DC money. He's pouring a lot of this money into legislative races. So I would also encourage folks to pay close attention to who the candidates are and what their actions are and where their money is coming from, because hanging on to the legislature, a conservative legislature, I think is just as important as who ends up in the governor's mansion. But all that to say, I could go on and on about that. I want to shift gears here and talk about, you and I had the chance to be together in Washington, D.C. for President Trump's Great American Agriculture Celebration. I know you've been to D.C. many times, as have I, but this trip felt different when there's 1,000 farmers and ranchers on the White House lawn. Like, it felt like friendly, like a reunion of sorts, really. But I wanted to ask you about that experience for you and your family, and maybe either some highlights from Trump's speech or just, what this administration is working on that you think is maybe positive or negative, dealer's choice, I guess, for American agriculture.
I thought it was a fantastic experience. I think it's quite an honor to see our industry portrayed by a president and the White House in that manner. And I just remember sitting there thinking about that. I sat with the executive director of Wyoming Farm Bureau, Karen Clark, who's a good friend of mine. And I think the spectrum of agriculture was well represented as well. I know Charles stood in the back with much of the RCAF board, and I met several of the leaders of major ag organizations, in addition to just farmers and ranchers. Wonderful mix. I want to give just a shout out to Secretary Rollins. I have heard her say that one of her top priorities was to re-educate people to the fact that agriculture is interactive to every other thing in America and is critically important to our nation's success across the board. And obviously she has gotten that message across to the president for that to have occurred. So I think the psychological look of things is important, right? And none of this is by chance with any administration, but to place 3 tractors in front of the White House, and like you said, FFA was in the front row, and 4-H. And I found out later there were some children from where I grew up there, all the way back through all of our organizations, a huge number of media and influencers within the ag realms. All of our other trips to DC in the last year have been very, meeting focused, working on these very serious issues. And those are critical. And I appreciate the chance to go and be at the table for those. But this was, as you mentioned, a much more lighthearted, celebratory of our industry type mindset, mentality, and approach. And yeah, it was just wonderful to be a part of it. It was a stretch for our family. We were in the throes of calving at the time. We have a wonderful hired man that enabled us to run back out there for that. But I am grateful we were able to experience that very positive atmosphere.
That's the hard part, right? When you're running a ranch. I had said to my husband, like, man, can I even swing this? Like, I'd been gone a lot. And, like you said, you're in the middle of calving. We're getting into AI season. You got the kids. And my husband's like, oh, the president of the United States invited you to the White House lawn.
Right.
You better go. It's like, okay, you make it work, I suppose. And I don't mean to make light of it. It was a super honor. But it does feel like there is a little shift here where for years, the White House and what happens in DC has been very inaccessible to the everyday person. And what I'm experiencing with Rollins and the USDA especially is more of an open door policy. They want to hear from independent producers on the ground. And, you can share what's going on in the countryside. And they are showing a resume of responding to these real issues that haven't been heard in our lifetime for sure. I did want to make sure to ask you though, because like you said, there's good things coming out of this administration, but also making sure that there's follow through. Now, last week, there was an update on your case that kind of broke and hit the news. Can you talk about that and where things are with that?
Yes. So we have worked with the USDA over the course of the last year. And one of the ongoing questions is, where are the U.S. Forest Service employees that were involved in our situation? And I had been trying to get an answer to that for several weeks. And then I believe we had some big sign up days, people signing up for their summer allotments. And a lot of our friends and neighbors walked into the Custer, South Dakota office, and one of the employees was there. And that did not resonate well with the public. But to your point with this administration, I have since talked to people at the USDA and the U.S. Forest Service and kind of explained that if your narrative says that you fixed it and it's all taken care of, and then the people on the ground walk into an office and it very clearly isn't, that's something we need to make sure we're addressing. So I want to thank them. They did get back to me. We've had some good conversations since. I'm now back in the loop, and that makes me a lot more comfortable. It's one thing when you're in the loop, and it's something else when this just blindsides you. So yeah, last week was kind of a busy and a crazy and a hectic week. I know they continue to work on it. I think one of the more, I don't know if there is a means for agencies to eliminate their bad apples once they have determined they have them. And I think that's an alarming component of this lawfare. And we saw this with Doge, that just because people are proven to be ineffective or not working towards the goals of the administration or working in violation of agency policy, and then we could deep dive on into agency policy and the validity of that, where most of it is not passed by Congress. Like, there are layers here of this, but the reality is, I'm wondering when and where the conversation comes into play of how have agency employees ended up with potentially more power than other components of government, and certainly more power than we, the citizen.
Well, right. I mean, just to spell it out for people, the real concern here is, okay, so this administration, got after the lawfare, the bad actors, they get a slap on the wrist though, instead of
Right.
a termination. So
Yeah.
this administration goes, a new one ushers in. The bad actors are still there under a new authority. They get to go back to business as usual pretty soon. I mean, is that it? I mean, that's the fear. You're
I don't,
back in
yeah,
the sights, right? And the
that's,
revenge tour starts all over again. So, do you have some reassurance that there will be some follow up then on, especially in your case, or is that in limbo right now?
I have reassurances that it is being looked into and that I will be kept a little more in the loop so that I can keep the ag community. They continue to watch this with a laser focus, kind of appraised of this. And, this isn't one or two people. It is in my situation, but this is very critical to your point because we heard Mr. Sullivan list, a dozen names yesterday of people facing this with numerous agencies at state and federal levels of government. So this is much bigger than the Maude situation, but we once again are a classic poster child for the larger issue in that it is unclear how and what the options are as we move forward, but it needs to be part of both the conversation and the resulting actions of addressing lawfare. Is how do we ensure that when there are bad apples, that they do not remain in positions to attack additional people under future administrations. So those were the conversations this last week. I feel much better after speaking with people at USDA and US Forest Service and just recognizing that that is a component of what we are facing here on the ground level and what we all expect to be addressed. In addition to just stopping Heather Maude from going to prison, my neighbors would really like to not be the next one to have that experience for no reason the next time there's an election.
Right, right. For a government, this administration wants to cut spending and roll back some of this stuff. Imagine the cost savings if we eliminated the positions of these bad actors. I think that would be a very prudent decision by this administration. Okay, so just a few minutes left in the show, Heather. I kind of want to open it up to you. What are you guys working on now? I follow your social media all the time. You guys you're a busy family. You're working. It's the American dream. You're farming, you're ranching, you're going to the farmers markets. You've got a great presence out there with the meats that you guys raise. What's next for the Maude family?
Oh, I wish I could tell you, Amanda.
I get that. Like total open-ended question. And we're both just tired moms are like, well,
yeah,
depends on
yeah,
today.
We just had our show pig sale here. We raise hogs. Most of them are for meat. But being in Western South Dakota and me being from Eastern Wyoming, there are not a lot of show pigs in our area. So shortly after we got married, we started a show pig sale. It's one of my favorite things. We get all these young kids. We really specialize in beginning showmen. If you get super, super competitive, most people, we direct them to someone that raises really good show pigs. But
sure.
We had our sale here 2 weeks ago, and it was normal. And that is the first normal thing that I recall doing since March of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 years after, and it was overwhelming in the best possible way. I ended up being the first person home, and I just, the emotions of having something that you love to do actually come to fruition. You get to do it again, and it's normal. So I think one of the things that the Maude family looks forward to is just a little bit of normalcy coming back in our lives. Our lives have been changed forever, and the good Lord has a plan for all of us. And we will continue to champion these American rights for the rest of our days because, Brett Kinsey has told me this several times. You didn't pick this, Heather. This picked you. And that gives you a strength that a lot of people that just picked it don't have. And I don't take that lightly.
That's right.
But I would love to brand our calves without it feeling like a press conference with our neighbors. And I love them. And I am so thankful for their backing and their support. But when we came home from the May 1st press conference in 2025, our next door neighbors, the Eatoffs, they branded the next day. And they have championed us throughout this entire thing, along with everyone that comes to their branding. We couldn't talk when we went to DC.
Mm-hmm.
And the day after we got back, we could talk for the first time. It was a sense of elation, and I loved that. But I don't think people recognize the value of having a normal life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so a few normal things would be great. The show pig sale was one of them. Loved it. I am the president of our Black Hills Farmers Market, and that is where I sell all summer. Our summer season starts May 2nd. I didn't get everything done the way I wanted to last year. So I'm actually, the next 2 weeks are defrosting freezers, reorganizing, going over price sheets. And it's like, I think I can actually do that without spending, my estimation is that I spent over 30 hours a week on this for 2 years straight. And I still spend quite a bit of time, but I don't think I'm doing 30 hours. So I know that's a very long-winded answer, but I'm excited for that. I go sort pears for my parents in mid-June, and there is no cell service there. And that's one of my favorite things. And I had to pack a phone with me the last 2 years in case an attorney, a judge, an official called, in case Charles got arrested. I don't know. He doesn't come with me. And so it's going to be really nice to put the phone on airplane mode and only pull it out to take pictures.
Yep.
Yeah. And my kids have been with us through all of this, and they have done wonderful. We need to catch up with some school too, which they're quite upset about. We do homeschool. And so we're also going to have some summer school in here. So they're very bummed about that development, but we're going to get back on top of that too.
Lyle's working on his governor run. He's too busy like getting ready to run the state or the country. So I could see how math might get in the way of his long-term plans, but I understand the normal thing more than you know. I would like to close the show with that being a call to action for everyone. You know, I've had people tell me, I don't like politics. And I think that's been a really good excuse for apathy and not being engaged. But you might not want to have anything to do with politics, but politics has everything to do with you. And if you are not at the table or getting involved or talking to your legislators or your elected officials, if you're not helping in these primary races or helping to guide and shape the direction that our government goes, well, then there's some pretty bad apples in our government who will make the decisions for you. And then they get to bring those decisions to your front door, to your pasture, to your livelihoods, whether you like it or not. And so you can be active on the front end and be proactive, or you can go be on defense, having to undo the bad stuff that's being done while you're not paying attention. But the reality is, we're celebrating 250 years in America this year. It is still a relatively young experiment. We have to work for it. We have to fight for it. And future generations are counting on us. And so, Heather Maude, I think they woke up a sleeping giant with you that they're going to wish they just left you alone to raise your kids and cattle in Western South Dakota. But instead, now you're a powerhouse and a champion for property rights, for family farms and ranches. And I can't thank you and Charles enough for everything you've done, for everything you've been through, you never should have been through. And now the beacon of hope you give to so many others of saying bad stuff has happened, but it's not going to keep happening on our watch. So thank you so much for committing all this time to this good fight.
Thank you too, Amanda, and for having me on to highlight it. I appreciate all that work you do to get it out there to people as well. And for, letting me be a part of this episode as we go on to the next chapter, it feels like, in our state. So
that's right. Well, more to come from Heather Maude and her husband, Charles. And if you liked this episode, if you found it useful, please share it on social media. Help spread the message far and wide. Our work continues to keep families on the land and food on the dinner table. I'm Amanda Radke. We'll see you next week on the Heart of Rural America.